Good afternoon, Rochester. My name is Wafa Al Khalifa, and I work for Destination Medical Center. And I'm here with my colleague Chow Matala, who serves the city of Rochester as the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Director. I welcome you all to the Equity Series, the February episode. And we do have several presenters with us today. And so I'm going to quickly just remind everyone of where you can find all the former or the previous Equity Series episodes. You will find them in the DMC YouTube channel. So feel free to check that out and see all the previous episodes. And if you or your organization have any questions about the Equity Alliance or the Equity Series, or if you have any ideas, suggestions for other topics, feel free to connect with me or Chow Matala, and we'll be more than happy to, consider all your ideas. And before we formally begin, I want you all to engage with me here quick and utilize the chat. If you haven't used the chat yet to introduce yourself, your name, and the organization, feel free to do that. But I also want to invite you all for a pulse check. As we are going through everything in our state and our city, I just wanted to see if you could describe how you're showing up today with one word. How are you showing up today? And I'll give you all here a minute to share. Go to the chat.
I could share. My one word is listening.
Listening. Thank you, Julie. Thank you. Show up. Determined. Look at that. Bring that positivity. This is awesome. As you're writing all of that, maybe I'll check with you at the end of the episode today and see how you're feeling after the presentation that you'll hear today. But I wanted for us to just before I introduce to you our presenters today, as we begin today, I want to acknowledge the recent immigration enforcement activity in Minnesota that has created fear and uncertainty for many families in our communities. Moments like this remind us why this work matters. The Equity Alliance, Equity Series exists to create a space for learning, dialogue, and action that helps build systems where people feel seen, safe, and able to fully participate. Today's conversation on calendar equity is about shaping public institutions that reflect the lived experiences of our communities, not just for today, but for the future generations. We're grateful to be joined by leaders who have each played a role in advancing this work from different perspectives. Today, you'll hear from Shannon Anderson, the chair of Hopkins School Board, who will share the board's perspective on policy constraints and what it took to move the calendar equity forward. And also, you'll hear from Oscar Wolf, student body president at Columbia University, who brings a powerful student voice and advocacy lens to this conversation. And I also want us to welcome in Nick Lightfoot. He's the assistant superintendent for Hopkins School. We're so excited to have you all join us today and hear from you on your experience and the lessons that you have gathered through this process of changing the school calendar. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having us. I wanted to go ahead and just quickly turn it over to Oscar, who has important perspective to share on the student voice and advocacy piece of this, and he has to run to class. So wanted to give him a chance to share with you his perspective.
Thank you so much for that and for that introduction. I do apologize that I'll have to be running to class soon. But such is, I guess, the punishment for good advocacy in high school. You end up having to actually do the college thing. But it has been amazing. I cannot complain. So yes, back in high school, I served as a student board representative for the Hopkins School District. And in that role, really zeroed in on calendar equity as a major issue that I wanted to work on. In my case, I'm a Jewish student. I'm actually Zooming you from the Jewish Theological Seminary right now, where I do a dual degree program with Columbia. And I always remembered, like, since kindergarten, that feeling of being left out or not included by needing to miss those couple of days of school every single year because of my religion, essentially. And then as I reached high school, everything really started falling into alignment. I was on this board with board members who were willing to listen and really engage with this message. And Hopkins also is, of course, a very diverse district where, in addition to having a large Jewish community, we have a large Muslim community. So we really built a coalition with that community and collectively really worked to push this new calendar. And ultimately, what we passed had days off for Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Eid. And it was pretty quickly picked up by some of the surrounding school districts. Minneapolis Public Schools passed it shortly after. And it was really, for me, like, this is still what I point to as like the example of government working how it's supposed to work and representation working how it's supposed to work. I'm pursuing a career in government and public service at this point. And when I'm in these interviews for internships and jobs and they ask me why this is something I'm interested, I still point to this experience of advocacy in high school for calendar equity as sort of evidence that this is really a method that works. So I really appreciate how many people are on this call and how much interest there is in this issue. I apologize that I can't stick around longer. But if anybody would like to connect on this, I'm really happy to continue this conversation after class. Shannon has my contact info if anyone wants to reach out. But really, thank you all for being here and thanks for including me.
Oscar, do you have 1 minute to just give people a sense of how you organized the students to, and also how you were able to continue to bring student voice into the process that we went through as a district? I know you were instrumental in continuing to organize the thoughts and input of students and then bring it into the space where change could actually happen.
Sure. I think the most important thing truly is faith in the system, right? Like, we live in an era right now where increasingly people do not believe that representational systems work. And what we demonstrated at Hopkins by passing this new calendar was that it did. And I think that mattered, right? People saw that their voices were not just listened to, but acted upon, right? Their leaders actually took action based on what they had said. And because of that, it's worth it to go to another board meeting. If you know that there is legitimately a chance that if you complain to the board, I use complain as a good thing, that's a completely fine thing to do. If you go to the board and make your case for something, that there's a real chance that within a few months you're going to hear back and something is really going to be happening, people are going to go, and people do go. If they don't believe that the system works, if they don't believe that people are listening to them, if they don't believe it's going to result in concrete change, if they haven't seen evidence of that recently, they're going to be much less inclined to attend. So it's absolutely a self-fulfilling prophecy where when we're accomplishing things, we're going to accomplish more things, and when we don't, we don't. I've experienced that here at Columbia, where, if you haven't noticed, we had a difficult couple of years over these past few years. But this year, I knock on wood, I say it tentatively, but like, things are going well. And the reason for that is because we have stayed really committed to advocating for concrete changes, for tangible things. Yesterday, I sent out an email to the student body announcing a travel fund, right? Like, this could not be more separated from the political debates we had for the past 2 years. This is just a good governance measure, right? It's just a thing that helps people. And I think staying grounded in those base, how can we make life better for people, is the way to keep people engaged long term.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much.
Appreciate you.
Thank you, Oscar. Thank you so much for joining us. Back to you, Shannon. Welcome.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. Sorry for that quick pivot. So my name is Shannon Andreson. I am currently chair of the school board, and I'll just give you a little background on Hopkins. I know that when we were talking earlier, that we got a little introduction into the city of Rochester, and the Hopkins School District is comprised of the city of Hopkins, but also 6 other municipalities. So we are not constrained to just the city of Hopkins, but we have a lot of other cities that our residents reside in. And so what I heard earlier resonated a lot with me, because our demographics in the school district of Hopkins reflect I feel like almost exactly your reality in the city of Rochester. We have a pretty diverse school district. It is increasing in its diversity as time goes on. We have a student demographic that is around 50% students of color. We have a lot of diversity in our cultural heritages that come to our schools, as well as language. I think we have currently around 70 heritage languages that are spoken in our district. And we also have, as Oscar mentioned, our 3 largest cultural groups in our district are our Jewish community, Somali and Hmong, and we advocate, Muslim and Hmong, and we advocate around those cultural differences in language access, and as well as what we're all here to talk about right now, calendar equity. And so just giving you a little context for how we advocate in Hopkins and we govern the school district is really rooted and based in the celebration and the uplifting of our diversity and what our students bring and families bring to the district. And so one of the things too that we do at the board level is we center student voice in all our work. So having Oscar here today was really important to me, because this work really was led by students. And Oscar is someone who was really good about gathering up student voice, not just himself, and his friends, but really getting to the entire student body and bringing that feedback and that advocacy to the board table. And the board, because it is part of our operating process to center student voice in our work, responds really effectively to what students bring to the table. So wanted to give you that context about how this work came about. And so we at the board table knew that calendar equity was an issue, because we want our families and our students to feel a strong sense of belonging, because we know the ways in which that shows up in educational outcomes. So one of the things, school calendars can be a little bit tricky, and I think that a lot of people don't understand just how many constraints are put on a school district, and in particular on a school board. We often get feedback from our community about how they want the school calendar to look. And so we have to balance what are the needs of our community, but also what do we know is best practice in the education, as well as we have a lot of constraints that are put on us by the state legislature. So one of the things that people may not know, but the amount of time that children spend in the classroom is legislated. We have instructional hours that we have to meet, and that's a minimum. And usually a lot of districts go above and beyond that. We don't have to, but that is oftentimes how it works. And then you may have heard this because it's an issue that comes before the legislature every year. We as a school district cannot start school before Labor Day. It is state law. And there's a loophole that oftentimes we will try and use, but it really puts a lot of pressure on school districts. We have to meet so many instructional hours. We have to consider our employment contracts that oftentimes will have a certain set amount of time off for our employees, and also meet that constraints of having summers off, and even the day that we can start school is legislated. So when we're thinking about the calendar, we think about all of those things, and Nick can talk a lot more about that because he's in the implementation side. But one of the things that the Hopkins School District has done, our strategic plan is called Vision 2031. And we brought in, community leaders, families, educators, staff to really talk about how does the district need to strategically position ourselves so that we are providing a brilliant future for all of our students. And one of the things that became crystal clear as we were talking was that one of our core values is vigilant equity and authentic inclusion. And it is the strategic vision of the Hopkins School District to eradicate predictable outcomes based on race and socioeconomic status. And when you really start looking at calendars, you find the ways in which traditional calendars have upheld those very predictable outcomes. And so our idea of revamping how we look at our calendar and how we talk about it was to center equity. As we were looking at our calendar, because we know the ways in which the old calendar was upholding those very systems that we were trying to disrupt. So we had an equity audit that went through our system. And one of the things that was called out was our calendar. We were not honoring, we were not equitable about our cultural and religious holidays observance. And the other factor I think that is something that we have shifted a lot is recognizing not just that, but that how do our calendars and the ways in which we plan our educational year impact our families with differing socioeconomic statuses. And things like early release and late start days, they disproportionately impact families that struggle. And evening events, long breaks, and also the summer calendar has a big disproportionate impact. And so we look at that as well when we're talking about equity. So I will now turn it over to Assistant Superintendent Nick Lightfoot to talk about the administrative perspective, because the board's role is governance. So we put into place more of a directive and a policy piece and the strategic plan, and recognizing the ways in which we're directing the administration to adapt and implement the calendar equity policy that we have.
Thank you, Chair Andreson. I just echo the comments about partnership from our student board representative to our board chair to our members of the community. The engagement by all was required because none of this would have been possible if we had not created those partnerships as an essential framework for how we build forward. And so as we looked at the implementation, we really were met with strong support. And that was also a benefiting factor. So that when we went to the table in drafting recommendations, our calendar approval process is a process where we work collectively with our education association. We collectively come together, we produce drafts, the drafts go in front of the board. When they go in front of the board, they go in front of the Education Association governing board, they go in front of our administrative cabinet, they go in front of the school board, and then through collective work over a couple reads with our school board, we land on what that calendar will look like. And the work that we did with these specific iterations really revolved around what Oscar identified. The work that we did with our student groups, the work that we did with our populations, said these really are, when we went back to our attendance data, for those that are data driven, we went back and looked at, hey, where are the dates where we're seeing much of that attendance issue being the impact? Because if this is our policy, if this is our practice, and we intend good things, but the impact is negative, we certainly need to look at that as a system. So we use that data element to drive what that looked like. And so we landed on Eid, we landed on our two Jewish holidays as the three that we would look at within our calendar drafting. Not totally inclusive, which is always part of the challenge in looking at what could it possibly be. But as the first step into the space, knowing that we would be serving the majority of students in the largest data sets that were being impacted, at least from the data that we could see. So we went together, drafted those, and then had dialogue with our students about, if we are looking to make this change, help us with the why. And I think some of the more profound learning from this was that we have always felt that even in our policies, we allowed for students to come forward and say, I'm not going to be here on a holiday, and be excused for that day. But I thought some of the student insight that was really profound was saying, look, that places the burden on me as an individual who is looking to practice my faith. It places the burden on me. Why can't the system in some way respond? Because even if that burden is on me, the system is inconsistent, with some instructors honoring it, some not, some understanding, some by their own misunderstandings, not fully doing what should be done. And if that burden on me as a student is to confront the instructor saying, hey, you had a test on the day that was a holiday that I was excused for, and it places a burden on me as a student. They were concerned about bringing those concerns forward, because to bring a concern forward, even if it wasn't being honored, meant that they had to confront the educator. And so we were dealing with some sets of circumstances where we really could show direct benefit by removing a burden, so that we could say in the system, educators, this removes a burden for you for having to navigate that day where you have a lot of absences that we need to be mindful of. And for students, it's a benefit of being able to honor the practice of the day in its intended purpose without feeling that there would be some kind of negative repercussion and additional burden on them. So I would say those are some of the general administrative perspectives. Part of the, if you want, the technical aspect of some of these pieces, the challenges were, does this extend the calendar longer if we have 3 days where we don't have students, we don't have staff, and we still have to get 185 days? That's what our teacher educational professional contract really revolves around. If we have to get those in and we have to start after Labor Day, what does that look like for June? Because the board says, wait a minute, June 20th might be a little bit too late. We generally have to go back and look at, are there some ways that we can really fine tune the work that we're doing with the days that we have to make it beneficial for all? So in general, I would say that's kind of the high level picture of looking at how we implemented it, who we consulted. Our goal, of course, to try to be truly inclusive and ongoing adaptations. As we look, we have and we still are mindful of, for example, we just celebrated the Chinese New Year as a cultural recognition. We know that with our Chinese immersion program, we also serve a large community that is asking us to consider, might there be a possibility for Chinese New Year? And as we look at those aspects of our cultural traditions and ways in which we honor those, we try to look at benefit, burden, and intent and impact, and looking at how we might analyze what those might be.
Thank you, Nick. Could you talk a little bit about, I always appreciate at the board table hearing about your process administratively to consult with community members and also other really important people in the district who can inform the administration about important considerations. I know in particular, Eid can sometimes be a difficult holiday to pinpoint when planning far in advance, as you have to do for a calendar, that we would want to recognize that in the calendar. If you could just talk about that process a little bit.
Absolutely. Happy to expand on that. We look also in building bridges with our faith community leaders so that when we have any questions, and we typically, when we arrive at calendar drafts, we'll run those by our local rabbis as well as imams so that we can get feedback on anything that we might be missing. We also look toward additional context in building those relationships so that, for example, even when we get close to graduation and we may come upon holidays that may not be high holidays, but are still holidays that are going to culturally impact, such that there may be an attendance impact, there again, intent impact. What we try to look toward is guidance that may help shape some of those and understanding our depth of what the practice looks like. Sometimes the Western concept of one day, one holiday doesn't meet the terms of something that might start at sundown and end at another day's sunrise. And so some of those aspects have implications, for example, for our athletics. And even if it looks like it might be a Saturday, well, wait a minute. If the practice is celebrated on a Saturday, what does that mean for us at sundown on a Friday? So we've started to expand those conversations so that it's not only just the nuance of the particular calendar, but it's also the nuance of how do we go in depth so that we not only hit the technical aspect, but we hit the spirit of how it is practiced and what the significance is. Does that help?
Yes, it does. And I also know that often we hear from community members who say, we don't want students or families to have to choose between fully engaging in their school community and fully engaging in their cultural, important practices as well. And so finding ways to continue, I think that was one of the things that I've learned about this process is it's not just passing that policy. It's not just implementing a calendar that has a couple more days off. It's really about being in that partnership with community and having a back and forth and saying, oh, you know what, this is maybe not the best way to honor this day, or maybe what we really need to start looking at is I know I've heard that having a day for Eid, but holding the 2 days around it is the best approach, and really having that ongoing iterations, coming back, talking to our community, seeing what's working, seeing what isn't. Do families, students, staff feel like their lived experience is being reflected in the calendar? if I made that. But I think that administration does a good job with that, hosting that and facilitating that back and forth conversation.
That's really awesome. Thank you so much, Shannon, and thank you, Nick. So yeah, I was gonna ask a question. If you have pushbacks and challenges, like what were the challenges and obstacles you have faced throughout this process?
Yeah, I think that, well, one of the things that we heard a lot, um, change is hard. And I think that one of the things that at the beginning, before I think there was a collective push for calendar equity, I heard a lot of leaders um, saying that, well, people really value their spring break, or people really value um, winter break, and not seeing the ways in which those breaks were uplifting a certain, cultural experience. Meaning that the spring break was usually centered around Easter and winter break was centered around Christmas. Um, and so really seeing a reluctance up front to let go of that traditional way of doing things and centering that one religious experience and cultural experience, to then, I think, through ongoing conversations and through student advocacy, we were able to shift the community into saying, okay, maybe spring break doesn't have to coincide with my traditional, holiday. And then the pushback became, well, we're losing so much instructional time, and lots of comparing to other districts and saying, well, look at how much extra time their students have now and we don't. And so really having that conversation of, one, where can we find time to bring back in? Where are there ways in which we can keep our instructional hours and also recognize more cultural and religious observances, but then also educating around the value of and quality of instructional time. So very much so saying, well, this might be really good instructional time for your family and your student, but who are we leaving out? And the number of hours that's important versus the quality of the hours. Are most students able to fully engage during those hours? And maybe that's qualitatively a better way to move forward. And so I think we've gotten our community more on board with not saying, well, it's a numbers game, and really talking about how this is a way to increase belonging, to increase the sense of engagement and buy-in, and feeling as if the district really values me and my presence and my ability to fully be a part of what's happening. And that too is also an ongoing conversation. But that was the conversation I feel like we have every year when we talk about the calendar. And then really ensuring, like we talked about before, that we are getting the correct guidance when we're making those decisions. So asking questions. I know I often ask when we have our drafts before us, have we been talking with our Hmong families? Are there observances that they would like to see that currently are not reflected in the calendar? Do we need to be more mindful and responsive to other groups Are we seeing impacts on attendance or outcomes, or even, you know, our testing data? Because if something is happening that's distracting students, or they can't get to school to be assessed, how does that impact their ability to show growth and learning over time? So just being really mindful that we're getting the right guidance and we're getting the right feedback, and we're also being held accountable by our community. We did just last year have an incident with graduation where it fell on Eid, and just making sure that we're continuing to get the guidance that we need as a district, and to be truly inclusive. We still have artifacts of the old calendar that is part of our contract, and feeling the tension of wanting to get more instructional days, but having that artifact of winter break, which is really centering the old way of doing things. And so, yeah, I think those are the biggest challenges, and it is an ongoing work.
Now, Shannon, I did see some comments and questions that came in the chat here, and I want to also invite others if you have any comments, questions that you want to share with us here, so we can ask Shannon and Nick. But one of the questions, which is similar to a question that I have prepared from Amanda, I am curious, have you done any surveys or data collection from the student body, students' families, or community members since this was implemented? And if so, what insights did you gain about the impact of this action by the school board?
Well, we did do surveys before the implementation came into place, and that was a lot of Oscar's work with the student community. And so I think that I don't know if we've had formal surveys. I think, Nick, you might have a better understanding of that. I do know that we've heard a lot from our students, a lot of gratitude. They've come and presented to the board about it. And so we hear from our students firsthand that this has made a real difference for them. I think Nick spoke to that, that we've alleviated that burden from them of having to go directly to an adult, right, who has authority over them to advocate for their needs. And I think that has helped immensely. Also with our extracurricular activities, we get positive and negative feedback, right? Like I've heard both sides where students feel really grateful that they don't have to miss important sporting events with their team because of our calendar, and because our coaches are instructed to be mindful of those days and to not schedule practice. However, advocacy still needs to happen at the state level. We're part of the Lakes. I'm not going to remember the whole name, but the Minnesota School Sports League, and they don't have calendar equity, right? So there will be tournaments and games and things scheduled on high holidays or cultural days that kids can't participate. And so we do the best we can as a district, but we are part of a larger network of communities. And that's why things like this are so important, to be able to advocate for like statewide calendar equity. I think would help our students a lot. But even without that, we do get feedback from our students that, you know, this isn't working and this is why. I do know that we track a student's sense of belonging, and that is growing. And I feel that calendar equity is a piece of that, so we can extrapolate that students are feeling more of a sense of belonging. And I think a big part of that is that our calendar at the top level reflects their lived experience. I don't know, Nick, if you have any other input about how we are surveying students on this topic.
Yeah, I appreciate the general sense of belonging. Of course, the Minnesota student survey data that we look at. We also use the Panorama survey data directly to the calendar. I don't think we did a direct, specific survey on that. I mean, I think sometimes we get feedback from students saying, "Hey, we're surveyed all the time. Can we take a break from being surveyed?" But we try to get as much as we can through some of the anecdotal as well as behavior-based responses with some of those other surveys.
Thanks.
Thank you. I see a question that was shared here in the chat. How much input or consultation was there from the state in terms of these statutory requirements? I'll ask it to both of you if you have any input.
As far as the law that we can't start before Labor Day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think Nick can talk to more of the ins and outs of that, as how we navigate that. But there really isn't much input from the state. I think that anecdotally, when I go and advocate for this at the legislature every year, we get a lot of pushback from businesses and mostly tourism businesses that they want summers off and they don't want to start before Labor Day because they know then that travel goes down. So I think we're up against that lobbying arm. I think that there are a lot of, if you're in the business of education, you know the statistics and you know best practices, right? And having an agrarian calendar doesn't serve all students in the same way. For those students who can use the summer to have really enriching travel and or academic experiences, I think there is no learning loss, there is no deep impact. But for those students who don't have access to those resources, it's really impactful. And so it's an ongoing effort with the state legislature to get the law changed.
Yeah, and just on the general statutory requirements of the 165 instructional days and the instructional hours, those are set. So we always build any calendar of work that we do off of those base level assumptions to make sure when we build into the calendar planning that we hit those. So whenever we do our Mars reporting, all the sets of information, those are just factors that we build into the dialogue and the construction itself.
Thank you. I want to invite others to go ahead and drop their questions in the chat, or if you would like to unmute and share your comments. I know, Alan, you did share a comment about Chinese New Year. Would you like to unmute and share more?
Well, yeah, the comment I really make is, in fact, I was going to ask a question before about, the criteria of selecting what kind of event. Is it cultural based or is it religious based, faith based? So I was going to ask that question. In fact, I was interested about the topic of Chinese New Year, actually, but you answered the question. Seems like you're honoring the particular event. So and that's also brought up that actually the more inclusive term, unfortunately, is not being used in the United States is always calling a Chinese New Year. In fact, where I came from, which is Hong Kong and China, is known as Spring Festival. It's celebrating spring, arrival of spring. It's kind of interesting the way that it was being described in the country. It was more of a perspective of the people, I suppose, and then characterize it, based on some culture group. It's just a comment in that regard. But I do have another question. Perhaps, am I to understand that there's groups of students that can be excused attending school and then can be made up in certain days? Is that what the calendar actually does mean to you? Is that, am I hearing about that?
Well, that was our prior practice, was that students, if they had a religious observation or a holiday that they wanted to observe and they were going to miss school, that was certainly an excused absence, and they then had to go talk with their teacher about making up that work. If they missed a big test, it was up to them to make it up. But now what we've done is we have built those cultural observation days into our calendar. So we have Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, and Eid. Those are days off district-wide in our school calendar. So groups of students aren't missing days of school because of observing their religious holidays. It's all students and staff have those days off.
Is there any kind of potential that other students might take advantage of those days, even though it's really not necessarily the particular cultural affinity? What is the, sort of the criteria for saying that you can take that day off? Could it be
Everyone
disease
district-wide has the day off.
or
Everybody.
or everybody? Okay.
It's a day off of school.
Okay. Yep.
So I, as a teacher, that's a day off of work.
So it wasn't just so okay. At first, I misunderstood, perhaps, without the basic understanding, because basic understanding of how you implement that until now, actually, because you got into the description really deeper from a philosophical point of view, and I would have, it would be clearer if you actually stated that in fact is really that everybody can get everybody does.
Day off. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah.
just, there's another sense that in even other events like athletic sports events also, but that is not being officially what they call obligated, right? Well, it's
Mm-hmm.
just that people can for the people to set the calendar to be more mindful about avoiding those dates. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yes. There are days that we still maybe don't necessarily have off, but that, in particular, we have asked our athletic directors, our coaches, and other staff that run extracurricular activities to be mindful of certain days and holidays that a significant proportion of our student body will be otherwise occupied. So we will do that. That's always been part of our practice. But these are the days that we've built into our calendar to have off.
Thank you. Thank you, Al. I do have a question for you, Nick. If another school district or a city wanted to do this. And I know you've shared earlier about student advocacy and engagement. If you were to summarize, what are the first three steps you would recommend?
Yeah, I would say number one, prepare. And what I mean by that step is um, I wouldn't arrive at a conclusion without going through a process. And so the value so much is in the dialogue and the process. And I think that's what you heard from Oscar in the opening, was that the faith is really established when the process is established, because then people feel that whatever the outcome, the structural way in which it was truly honored. And to me, that's the work of preparation, knowing that this isn't an immediate decision point. This really is about setting the conditions for the voices to be in the room, to make this lasting and to make it sustainable, and to look at how we do it collectively so that we can share in the result. I would say that would be step one. Number two, it's to make sure that you have the data and look at what it is that you're looking to to accomplish and set up the plan. And then number three, really to create that sense of ownership, that this is owned by the community, this is owned by our educators, this is owned by individuals who participate. So I would say those are probably the three things. They aren't like real tangible. They're more big picture, but in order to do this level of change at this level of magnitude, it may just seem to be a calendar, but it is so much more. It really is about something that speaks to the way in which a community engages.
Thank you, Nick. And a follow-up question that I have received in regards to sharing kind of a timeline. How long for the process did take? When did Hopkins schools start having those three additional holidays to be included in the calendar? From the engagement process, collecting data to working with students who are advocating, all the way to the decision being implemented. When was it? And has there been any process of assessing how did that go, review it, and been reviewed based on like families, students, like what are the impacts that has been experienced by all the students, families, and staff? If you can answer that question.
Sure. I can probably speak to timeline, and Shannon, if you want to speak to kind of the community piece. The timeline, it's interesting. We've created a very open system so that if students or community members have questions about policy or practice, we have a monitoring committee that reviews policies at every board meeting, invites community input, and we had dedicated students who said, this isn't working for us. And, from that point of them bringing forward, how do we make this change, working with their faith communities? So some of that legwork was done by them intentionally to bring it forward, because we have created a process where we intentionally listen and listen deeply to the best that we can. And as part of that process, we then work with a monitoring committee, bring that forward, dialogue with the board. So I would say over the course of, implementation wise, a year. It really, the board set as its goal and the directive to the administration. We're driving for calendar equity. This is a board goal set with and through our superintendent. And then we took that and actualized that within the next calendar year. So the actual construction of it pretty technical, and we could do that. But a lot of the legwork up front wouldn't have been as fast had we not had already developed some of those dialogue processes and entryways into asking the community to look at something different.
Yeah, and I would add to that too. I kind of came onto the board at the beginning stages of this. And so what I saw was very clearly that this was being led by student advocacy. And I would urge any community organization that is looking to make really impactful, meaningful change like this to start with your youth. Because they're already talking about this. They're doing it, and they are a powerful voice. And so Hopkins, I think, is a leader in the state for how we center student voice at the board table. We have had student board representatives for a really long time. But we have a board cohort, which means that we have multiple students. We have 2 students per grade year at our high school. So we have, and we also have a virtual school. So we have 10 student board reps. So there's a lot of capacity for the students to be actively involved in board work. And I know lots of cities have a youth advisory board. And so I would just recommend that if you're looking at this and you're finding that there is a lot of reluctance amongst the adults for things to change, look to your youth. They are probably have been asking for this for quite some time, but not knowing how to scaffold and structure the actual change. And that can be your work, is to provide that scaffolding and the pathways that Nick was talking about to affect change. But the youth will do it if you give them the ways to do it. And so that would be my recommendation. If you want this to happen and you're finding resistance or you don't know how, just get the youth activated and you'll find it moves quite quickly.
Thank you so much, Shannon. Thank you so much, Nick, for being with us today and answering all these questions and sharing your experience at Hopkins Schools on how you were able to adapt additional days of holidays in the school calendar. I think if there's something that I would agree on from what you just shared, is youth has been always a source of inspiration. And especially in Rochester, we have seen youth lead nonprofit organization. We've seen youth be part of designing projects and policies. And so I hope that your presentation today inspires our youth and our organizations to look at the model and how you were able to adapt additional holiday days. Thank you both for being with us. And thanks to Oscar, who was with us earlier briefly. I just want to remind everyone that it's Black History Month, and I just want everyone to know where they can follow all upcoming events, whether in the NAACP local Rochester chapter, or check out also Griot Arts. There's several events that they're happening. Also follow the group that Amanda from Rochester Area Foundation have shared information about continuously, where you can know about upcoming events, sessions, educational opportunities that we're hosting in our community that can provide you information on making Rochester more equitable, more vibrant. And then our next episode, everyone, is going to be March 11th. I hope that I get to see you all with a new topic, new ideas. And until then, stay safe and have a great day. Thank you.